fellow travelers, and welcome to another episode of Verta Stars Podcast fourth season. My loyal listeners, thank you for continued support. This is an amazing episode because James Palmiotti returns to the mothership to talk Deadly Tales of the Gunslinger from Image Comics. Now come aboard as we go traversing the stars. Hello, Mr. Palmiotti. Thanks so much for coming to Verta Stars Podcast.
Thank you, buddy. Good to see you again.
It's always my pleasure to have you back. You are awesome, and I can't wait to talk about Spawn. You're the writer now of Deadly Tales of the Gunslinger. So how do you get involved in the project?
It's actually it was I was at New York City Comic Con like 2 years ago or 3 years ago, maybe 2 years ago. And Thomas Healy, who's the editor on the book, was I was at my table and just doing my thing at the con, and he came over and he introduced himself. He says, "I'm the editor on all the Spawn books for Todd," and we were talking, and would you have any interest in writing a book for us? And I said, yeah, of course. I said, I actually buy Spawn, so I know the characters pretty well. And I said, what are you thinking? And he says, well, we want to do Deadly Tales of the Gunslinger as an ongoing. So we would want you to stay on it for a while. We don't want you to do like 10 issues and go. We want you to stay on it for a while.
Yeah.
And he goes, and I know your past is Jonah Hex, you did over 100, Harley, you did over 125 because you know how to stay on a book for a while. And I told him, I said, yeah, honestly, I'm one of those comic readers that likes the team on a book and wants to stay with the team for a while. I don't like when it tosses different teams and restarts at number one 18 times and all that kind of stuff. And so we talked for a while, and then we met in San Diego. We met with later in the year, met with Todd. We had some phone calls, and then we sat with Todd, and he talked about what he wanted on the book. Yeah, we went from there. I mean, I had to create a Bible for the book because Todd writes the character in the modern day in his book in Gunslinger. This is a book where it's actually about him in the past. So I needed to pick Todd's brain, and then I went in and wrote maybe like a 25-page Bible of the life of this character, from his grandparents to his parents to how they got to the West from Europe and all that kind of stuff. I had to kind of do that in order if I'm going to start world building for a bunch of years. And that took me a while. And then once we got the okay, I started in on issue one, which was like over a year ago. To give you an idea, I'm working on issue 10 right now. So as one is out now, probably we have up to next November done. So
Nice.
Todd does not like to miss deadlines, but with the first issue, I told Todd, I said, I know you do 20-page books, but I need a lot of pages to tell the story. And I said, I don't want to condense it so it doesn't breathe. I don't want this first issue to just be really condensed
Hmm.
and a quick read. I said, is there any way we can get more pages? And he asked me how much I needed. Thomas asked how many I need. I said, at least another 17. And that's why the first issue is 37 pages, only for $3.99. Let's be honest, if it was a Marvel or DC book, it would be $5.99 or $6.99. But Todd is just, he explained it to me once. He said, I don't have the overhead those guys have, and this is what the price of a comic should be. That's why Todd's books are cheaper. And he goes, there's making money and then there's being greedy. And he said, I'd rather just make some money and make sure more people read my books and it doesn't cost them so much. And he's been very, very consistent about that.
Yeah, that's one thing I love about Tom McFarlane and his books because I buy his Spawn books, all of them, and for $2.99. I mean, it almost feels like you're getting, like you're ripping him off. You're like, I'm really gonna to steal this comic for only $2.99. Fine, I'll take it.
Right.
Like, are you sure?
I mean, he's very proud of the fact that he's able to not only keep the prices down, but he pays his people more money
Hmm.
than the big two. I mean, I make more money with Todd than I ever made with DC or Marvel. So he just has better accounting. There's less greed involved because, both companies, Marvel and DC, are owned by corporations.
Yeah.
So let's be honest. I mean, they literally are trying to make the most money and trying to pay everybody the least amount of money. And the past couple of years haven't helped. They've actually turned back people's rates and lowered rates. While Todd has the question. He posed you the question, what would you like to get paid? That was what he said to me. And I said, well, what do I like or what do I need? And he goes, no, what do you need? And I just told him, and he's like, yeah, okay, man, let's get started, get to work.
How many years ago was it? Was it 10 years ago? Maybe 15 years ago when DC made a huge deal about holding the line at 299. Remember how big of a thing that was for a while? And they had posters
Yeah.
of it and everything.
I mean, that was Dan the Dio's call. He wanted to keep the prices down. Um, and he did it for a while. It lasted for a while, but the reality of the difference is they have shareholders, and the shareholders go, why do we make less money this year? And then they have to say, well, if we charge $1 more, we'd make more. And they're like, well, charge $1 more. They don't.
Yeah,
Again, it's ridiculous, right? Because they have one hit film and that pays for all of the comic stuff
right.
in seconds. Um, I'll never really understand it, but I do understand when I do my Kickstarters and stuff, I do understand how much things cost on a small scale. Like I don't have the Todd, of course, because he does a lot of books, he gets a better rate at the printers. And then Marvel and DC, because they do so many, they get even a better rate. Their books actually cost a lot less than anybody else. So it's a kind of mixed up world, but I'm glad I'm working with a guy that understands and he's a fanboy and he understands the value of $1 and he's a guy that likes to give everybody their money's worth
No,
and
and
it
what else
shows.
what else I really like about what you said to me is when we talk about conventions.
Yeah.
Everyone's talking about like making money in conventions, but there's also that conversation about networking. That a convention
Right.
is about network, and you just proved that conventions are about networking, and you made a great connection because you showed up.
Yeah, I mean, it's not rare when I have somebody come up and say, "Hey, would you write this book or we'd be interested." It's rare when they follow through.
Mm.
Okay. Meaning, while I'm at the convention and I'm with people, they're always, "Oh, Jimmy, I want to get you to do this and that and that." And then I never hear from them again. This was different. Thomas stayed right on the ball, and we talked right after the show. And once we got the okay, he's like, "All right, man, get to work." He goes, "This is ongoing." So he said, "We're just hoping it sells, and you just keep writing them, and we'll get everything set." And that's pretty much my last year. I've been just writing this constantly. I've kind of gone quiet as far as doing other things because I've been focusing on this, and then of course on my Kickstarters, which is another part of what I do.
So the interesting thing about, I mean, you've written for Marvel, you've written a lot for DC, as you mentioned, Jonah Hex, which we'll get to a little bit on how that connects to Gunslinger. How
Yeah.
is it different writing for McFarlane Productions than it is writing for one of the big two?
Well, the big two have these little weird standards and things you can't do and things you can't say. Um, it's very nuanced, sometimes I remember when we wrote Jonah Hex 1, Justin Gray and I, and we handed in and we got a phone call back and they're like, this is the first issue of the book. I said, I know. And they said, yeah, Jonah Hex smothers a kid in it that has rabies and kills him. I'm like, yes. And they're like, the first issue, he kills a child with a pillow, puts a pillow over his face and kills him. I'm like, yes. And they're like, it's a little rough. And I said, you know what? I think, we had the conversation. I said, I think it sets the tone for what's going to come because it's going to be a rough book. You know, there were things down the line where we had to change in the series a little too sexy or it's a little too this or the violence is so over the top, it's crazy. Um, with Todd, it's sort of a conversation and his he reads everything, right? So I do get him on the phone and he goes, "Hey, what's with this or what's with that?" We talk about things. But if it makes sense, he kind of keeps with it. He's like, "Oh, well, that makes sense. So yeah, that's a good idea. I didn't even think of that." Or, you know, so there's a different, it's a just a different I only have one person in charge. Actually two, the editor, Thomas and Todd are the two people that I go through for everything. So it's a little easier and it's less. I mean, I was never I never had to change more things than when I wrote Harley with Amanda for 4 years or 5 years. We had to change so many things because they kept saying, "No, you can't do that. You can't do that. You can't do that." And but I will say, Dan DiDio said to me, he goes, "Your job is not to worry about what you can't do." He says, "Write it the way you see it. Let us worry about how crazy it was." And to his I get what he was saying. He's like, he doesn't want to cut me off at the knees and say, "This is what you can't do." He said, "Write it what you can, and then we'll figure it out as we go." but definitely when you're dealing with some like image and you're dealing with this, there's different standards that we can get away with, and I explored them in the book. I mean, I was going back on issue 9 and 10, and I was reading them again just because I was trying to. So every time I write a new issue, and you're gonna laugh at this, every time I write a new issue, Jeff, I go back and read the 3 or 4 issues before it again because I want to make sure there's consistency of character, right?
Yeah.
The way he sounds. Um, and I went in and read 8 and 9 for my layout of 10, and I was laughing. I'm like going, I need to tweak a little bit of 8 because it doesn't make sense that his tone would he would act that way. You know, and it's kind of great to have that extra time to do that because a lot of time, and again, this character is not really established in the past. He's only established in present day. And basically, my story is everything before the present day, before he gets pulled into the. So there are things that I have to keep constantly reading what Todd's doing because he says the character will say, "Well, I don't know how to read," and I'm like, all of a sudden, I have to acknowledge that why doesn't he read? Like, why
Right.
can't he read? So I have to deal constantly keep up with that. Um, because there's a whole internet worth of people that are there just to correct me every time. And I do get it wrong once in a blue moon, but most of the time I listen to people when I love reading reviews because some people are so invested in things, they actually help me out a little bit.
Now, I know this could be subjective or not subjective. Would you argue that the Spawn universe right now is a tighter universe than Marvel and DC?
It 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 is a less involved, less characters running around through it universe. So it's easy to wrangle 20 cattle instead of 2,000. And the DC universe, like the Marvel universe, you're wrangling 20,000 cattle. And a lot of times these cattle are on other people's land. And you have to kind of cross over to get to them. With Todd, he pretty much looks after everything. And the universe is tighter. And none of the titles go past the guys in charge. Like everything is read for consistency. So yeah, of course it's tighter because he has comparatively 1/30th of the characters that they do. And let's be honest, the thing that Todd's universe doesn't do is he doesn't restart a character at number one and have a
Hmm.
different team come and mess with it. There is consistency in all these books. In DC, let's say, or Marvel, all of a sudden there's a new number one and it's a Batman. And all of a sudden they're rewriting everything. And I personally, I'm a comic fan. I hate that because I feel like every time they put a new team on it, all of a sudden Bruce is a little weirder or different, or Superman's acting a little different, or the X-Men are completely different. And so I will say that he's able to control his universe a lot better than those guys do. Those guys, eventually, you figure out that they're chasing money. They're trying to get new people to read them and buy as many copies as they can. It's very important for them that things sell like crazy. I think Todd is a little more invested in. It's very important that everything's really good.
I think the fascinating thing about Comic Front and Spawn, and I don't know if there's another company or comic book that experienced what he experienced, which is a renaissance after 290 something issues, where suddenly the character blew up bigger than he's been in several decades,
Right.
all of a sudden, and now it's a massive universe of at least six, almost eight titles now. When you click Rat City and all the others from
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
Twitch and all those.
Well, I think it proves that the readers want consistency
Yeah.
in their universe. I know when we worked on Harley for 5 years, we made sure she wasn't in any other books unless we were writing them
Hmm.
because we wanted to keep the character consistent because we knew the audience demands consistency. And the minute we left, all of a sudden, Harley's all over the place by different creators and different voices come in and different people write it. And now the character doesn't have the intensity that it used to have because every book you buy, it has a different tone.
Hmm.
And although that may sell some books initially, what it does is destroy the characters eventually.
Yep.
It makes people sick of the character. Um, and you just can't keep throwing different chefs on the same meal after a while. Um, I This is what I believe. Now, you could argue it and you could say I'm wrong, but I think when you when you establish something that people like, you should keep with that thing. You can experiment, but keep with that tone and keep with that team. The minute we were off Harley, they took her right out of Coney Island and got rid of the whole supporting cast. And I was like, other than Frank Thierry, who kind of was stuck with it a little bit. And I said, that's a big mistake. I said, the reason ours worked is we took her out of Gotham
Yeah.
and you guys put her right back in. It works for a cartoon because the cartoon's trying to sell to the whole world. But as far as comics, it actually hurt. I think it hurt the whole line down the line a little bit.
Now, when you're thinking about Gunslinger, I find a couple of things interesting about the character. One, of this universal spawns, he somehow has become, other than Al Simmons, the most popular I think of the group. So, what do you think is about Gunslinger that suddenly he kind of all the ones they introduced, is the one that became the next most popular?
I think the way Todd writes him, it feels very grounded, the character in reality a little bit. Like even though Todd's stuff is so over the top on the regular book, it still feels a little grounded. Like we know who he is. He's trying to survive. He's a fish out of water character, unlike Spawn, where Spawn is, in control of stuff. And I think he just Todd's designs, he just did this cool looking character. There's a certain level of just this is cool in the Spawn books. Like this is cool, this is wild. Um, and I always have to bow to that because I'm trying to write this really intense Western, like you could almost smell the world that they're in. Um, but Todd, it's got this energy and this like kinetic look to it every month. And I just think people I mean, after 300 issues of Spawn, it's kind of fun to see another character. But they both sell very well. So, I just think the people that love this stuff love it and they love the consistency of the books, meaning no matter how much the world is changing around us and it changes every month and politics and craziness, there's always a new Spawn book or a new Gunslinger book out. And I think this consistency is like a warm blanket to people who really love comics.
And the other thing that I wonder if this is a challenge for you as the writer, someone unlike some of the DC stuff, the Spawn characters have very similar power sets.
Yeah.
Now, as you're writing them, how are you differentiating between the Spawns, considering that by definition of being a Spawn, they have to be similar?
So the Gunslinger character in this book just got his powers. So he does not even know what he's capable of. He doesn't know what could hurt him. There's things happening to him. Like all of a sudden there's these two wolves. All of a sudden this happens. He doesn't know what's going on. So we're along for the ride of him learning this. He's in the modern book, he has these, remember he mixes the blood with the bullets he is so far away from learning that right now, right? So this is the character. Right, this is the chick right out of the egg. It's learning what's around it. It's trying to comprehend because again, this character Tobias, he's trying to figure out like when he becomes Spawn in this book, it's sort of like someone telling you a reverse kind of thing, but someone telling you there is no Santa Claus when you're a kid. Meaning, the reverse thing is somebody's telling him everything you see and believe is not exactly what it is in the world anymore. So he's dealing with that, and that's going to be staying with him because he's questioning everything and he doesn't understand his powers. There's a scene in the book even where he gets stuck. They shove him against the on the wood, but in his hands, and his hands gets ripped. It's a violent book. But I'm trying to show that he's just winging it. He doesn't, there's this confidence he has when in his mission, but the minute that mission is over, he's sitting there going, what is going on? Why is this happening to me? And that is going to be a constant in this series because this character is not the confident gunslinger that's in Todd's book. The one in Todd's book is a guy who lived for a long lifetime to find out who he was. And he is that guy in the newer books. So Todd said the mission for me is to introduce him to everything. And that's what it is.
Now, the people who read Gunslinger know him as Javi Sanchez,
Yes.
but he's Jeremy Winston from your. I mean, is that understanding different of how we understand the character because of how we perceive him?
So part of writing the Bible was the big conversation with Todd saying, okay, In this, it says it's this guy, and in there, it says it's that. And so, who is my gunslinger that I'm writing? Like, who is it? And he explained it to me, and I said, "Oh, okay." And he said, "Look," he says, this is a story that unwinds, and you start to learn who it is." He said, "We don't come right out and say who it is because there is a story about that." And I'm like, "Okay." And then he explained to me, he's like, "Look, it's a multi-layered thing. It's not, he had there was a couple of short stories where we see Gunslinger spawn and he deals with this kid in a bar and he hands him a knife. And so there's a lot involved in there. And there's a two-page spread out. I can hold it up because I have the book in front of me where I kind of tease um sort of like where, let me see if I can get it.
Yeah.
Okay. There's these 2 pages in issue 1 give so much story. This is backstory. So this is like my Bible, and I took glimpses of the Bible. So when you read it, you're looking at it, you're like, okay, there's somebody with a father and a son in a hotel. There's somebody that looks like a Spawn guy, like a hand handing him a knife. And he's got, and then there's a thing with it. There's a saying goodbye at the station. There's somebody pulling somebody out of a fire. And then we see him with his sister in different stages with his sister. So when you write a Bible, you're able to go in, reach in and say, okay, I'm going to tease the audience with what's going to happen in the next 3 years right here.
Mm.
And that's the beautiful part about writing, that I know everything that's going to happen, but I'm going to tease you because if I just lay it out to you, there's no mystery to it. And again, the point of view of the story for Gunslinger is we're learning the world around him the way he sees it. And I think even the second issue gives you a little more. Like it gives you a little more. But part of that mystery is you don't want to solve it all because even the modern day gunslinger still has some stuff with his sister he mentions, and there's some stuff in there. And Todd and I talked out pretty much what should be showing, what I shouldn't be showing, and then what the characters should be doing on some level. So every time I talk to him on the phone, I have another page of notes. Because he just makes it up. He's like, "Oh, you know what we should do? We should do that, and we should." And I'm like constantly like, "Okay, okay, what was that thing again?" Um, but it's not like it's Superman where we see him on with his parents and the planet is fading and he sends the baby off. We don't lay it all out. Sort of the mystery of the character, sort of the fun of the character is the idea that he's figuring out as we're figuring it out. And
Mm.
we do run into later on, we do start to see where the Spawn universe slowly is existing around him. And if you saw the ending of issue 1, it's sort of like the character's seeing something he's never seen before, and he's questioning his own sanity. He's like, what is going on here? So, yeah, without giving away too much, there is a line in issue 2 where there's a mention of you've gone by many names and you will again, So
Mm.
there's a little bit of a tease in there, but I can't give away too much. I'll just say it does make sense, but I'm trying to make you understand as that's part of the key. It's also not the most important part of who he is.
Now, one of the interesting things about one of the famous moments in Spawn, and the regular Spawn, is his introduction with Malbolgia. Are we going to see the gunslinger moment where he's making the deal?
So probably not right away because the way this Spawn gets his powers um, is on some level not the same way the regular Spawn got his powers. This was handed over. We cover this within the first year, but there's something that happens. Actually, there's a panel in issue 1 that explains it, but nobody's going to understand that till they see it later.
Okay.
Um, and the idea that, as we know, when somebody gets the powers of the Spawn, they're either going to be really good at it or they're not, right?
Yeah.
And the power is going to have to be fine-tuned. And this is the story of the power not fine-tuned. This is the power wielding itself, but also at the same time not saving him as much as he would like it to do.
Another interesting about Gunslinger Spawn is that even in the first issue, there's a definite heroic. I mean, he goes by nobody, but he's definitely this heroic quality about him.
Yeah.
What is it in him that Malbolgia and that saw that? Sorry,
It's okay.
saw that made him a choice to be Spawn because he doesn't seem like the type of bad guy. I mean, Alistair was a killer.
Yes.
Maybe was Spawn was a killer. Even She Spawn is a killer. He seems to be a bit of a hero. What is in him that they're seeing?
Well, hero by definition, by our definition, is somebody that doesn't go around killing people,
Hmm.
right? And there is no lack of kill. He murders a lot of people in this first issue. Um, he's sort of like I will say he's like the Frank Castle, meaning these are bad people and they deserve to die. Um, but at the same time, so even a bad person is gonna see like this is wrong. He has this thing like this is wrong or these people are a victim. Let me give them a hand. But he's a murderer. He is a gunslinger. Um, so if we were like very religious people, um, and we were saying, well, he did save these people, but you're like, yeah, but he killed 13 people in that first issue. He's going straight to hell, right? So it comes down to the POV of how you see the circumstance. Now, if your mom was getting attacked, you'd want him to come and kill them all. But if you killed them all, that's different, right? Because all of a sudden you're damned to hell.
Yeah,
So there's a lot of gray areas, and that's always the fun of a Western is the idea that I was watching something before, and I can't remember the name of it, but it was a great scene where these characters were getting shot at, and they killed everybody in the room, right? And then when they go out, they leave the building, and the people that they killed, and they were bad people, had children. So the kids were just standing there, two innocent children. And they looked at the kids and they're like, what do we do? Like,
yeah,
and the guy says, we get on our horse and get the hell out of here. Like it was a hardcore moment,
yeah,
but I was laughing because like, sure, I'm rooting for them. And they realize, oh, they just killed these kids' parents, and these poor kids are just left it. So that is the world we live in a weird way, right? Because we have to
hmm,
look, even when my dad went and fought in World War II, there was never a day he woke up and said, I want to kill people. And it was never a day where he felt like, well, these people deserve to die. Um, but part of your training is to teach you these are the enemy. This is what the enemy's doing. You need to get rid of the enemy. So it's a different one. It's thank God you and I don't have this where we have to go to war and kill people because we would question everything, right? We'd
yeah,
sit there and go, well, why are we killing these people? Why don't we just figure out a way to do this? Or can we have two guys box this out and then somebody loses?
yeah,
Um, so there is the perspective of being liable for the things that you do. And in that sense of the word, in the Spawn universe, he's not the greatest guy. Um, but did you read the first issue?
Oh yes, it's really
Okay.
fantastic.
So without ruining for anybody, but the blonde woman in it is like, this guy saved me.
Right,
He saved me. And that's her world, right? He saved me. But the reality is, nobody's really safe in the world. And
right.
you know,
And one thing I loved about the first issue is that, and probably because you have so much experience from Jonah Hex, it so feels like you're steeped in the old west, right?
yeah.
Um, and is that challenging as well? To not only it doesn't become its own character, but you gotta be careful of whatever you do does not is not like, well, that didn't exist till 1903. What are you talking about here?
So I do research. So everything in this book is right after the Civil War, right? It's like a couple years after the Civil War. So if I'm gonna have an item, like I remember in Jonah Hex, I had somebody with a harmonica. And then I was thinking that day, I'm like, did they have harmonica? They must have had harmonicas then. And I looked and it was after the Civil War, and I looked and I said, oh, there's a French company that made harmonicas, but they were a little expensive.
Yeah,
So normal people wouldn't have one. And then in the story, I had it handed down from somebody else.
smart.
So I look at that. Also, I know the history of barbed wire and, when barbed wire came in. I know these things because I've studied them. And I don't want to have anybody tell me that never happened or that gun doesn't exist. Um, writing when I wrote Jonah Hex with Justin, and we wrote it for a while, like we wrote it for years. Um, our biggest thing was we want to make sure there's nobody out there that's going to read this and say, well, that's baloney because that didn't exist. We researched everything. I went to a ranch. He used to work with cows. We did everything. I learned a horseback ride. But more than that, we made sure we did the research because we didn't want. I remember I did a interview with a magazine called New West, and I think it was something True West magazine, famous magazine, and they interviewed me for Jonah Hex, and I got on the phone with the guy. He never met me. Got on the phone with the guy, and he's like, "Hello," and I'm like, "Yeah, hi," and he's like, "Yeah, I'd like to speak to Jimmy," and I'm just like, "This is Jimmy," and he's like, "Where is that accent?" And I said, "It's from Brooklyn, New York." And he's like, no. I'm like, why? He goes, so you don't live out west? You don't live like Utah? I'm like, no, man, I live in Brooklyn. And he goes, how the hell are you doing this? Like he goes, we're looking at these books. They're like historically. And I said, research. I said, look, I don't have to live on Mars to write Martians. I don't have to be a pirate to write pirates,
But
but I do have to get the way people speak down. And, once in a while I get sloppy with it because I need to say something that there was no words for back then, So I kind of get a little content, but I think basically, Gunslinger and these westerns are about what people don't say, and that's why you need a great guy like Patrick Reynolds to draw it. Because if you notice in the book, there's like whole pages with no dialogue or three words,
yeah.
and then there's a lot of words, right? There's a lot of conversation, but I always say the book has to breathe a little bit. It has to. I don't want you to read my comic. I don't want you to read this in 2 minutes. I want you to sit down and say, "All right, I need a cup of coffee, or I'm gonna have a beer. I'm gonna take this page by page because there's a lot of information." And that's why a lot of my pages have 6 or 8 panels on it because I like the pacing of the story, and I don't feel a need to rush it. And that's why it has 37 pages. But I'm setting the tone for the reader, and the consistency of the tone is what's going to keep people reading the book. So it's my job to do that.
It's kind of funny the crazy ass shit that a comic writer has to have in their head or learn to do these things. You must have a very interesting search engine.
I do. I have books. I have a wall of books about the Old West right over there. And then when I was learning how to speak, how people spoke in the 1800s, I bought these books, and it was full of letters that soldiers wrote home during the Civil War. So when you read how they speak to their parents and everything, it's very eloquent. At times it's not. Um, at times it's such broken English you can't even believe it. Um, but you start to read it, you start to understand there's a beat to it. And it's sort of like when you see a good Western versus a crappy Western in the movies. There's an eloquence to the good Western. The good Westerns, I always say, know how to not make noise for a while. They know how to let the scenery be the storytelling, let the person watching it kind of get their head into where they are. Don't constantly throw stuff at them. Westerns do have a pacing to them that's completely different from a superhero comic, and that's part of the beat that you have to understand.
Well, like I said, I really love the first issue, and I think part that was also kind of interesting. The first issue already introduced his connection, Winston's or hobby, however we want to refer to him as the gunslinger, connection to the wolves.
Yeah.
That's a connection that you don't see with the other spawns. So what is about Gunslinger that has this automatic connection to these wolves? You also suggest that it's not Javier necessarily controlling the wolves. It's something about the wolves' choice to be controlled by him on some level.
Yeah, so it's not even that he there's a scene where the wolves are helping him off the wall, right? And I gotta go put it in front of me. And it's not that the wolves are looking up at him. They're looking at him. And it's a funny because I'm like, the wolves are there. The first time we see the wolves, they're just there when he turns, right? They're observing. And then the next scene, he's feeding them. He shoots that guy and he's feeding them, right? Because he knows he's like, I need these guys. He doesn't understand why they're there, but he needs them. And then there's a scene where they're ripping his there's a scene where he's tied up pretty bad. Um against the bad guys. They get him and they tie him up and they in his hand. Oh wait, maybe that's this. We start to see that the wolves are something that comes with him. They're there. He doesn't understand their purpose, but he understands that it's part of what's happening to him, but he doesn't get it. And there are whole issues where the wolves are gone, like they're not there. Um, but I do have in a later issue, I have a later issue where he's in trouble, and then we just see them show up. So they're almost like babysitting him in a weird way. Um, except they're more observational, and then they do have a meaning to them later on, because again, this is the start of the sport. He goes in and kills these people and everything, but you'll see by issue 2 that confidence is like blown out of the water, because it's like that was the bravura of he's helping somebody else right now. There's a scene in this book where he learns that the girl is in the cabin, right? And it sort of changes his brain a little bit, and he steps up and becomes a fierce warrior. And we start to dissect that sideways a little bit as we go. It's sort of like there's revenge, and then there's all of a sudden there's something more at stake, and it's a choice he makes, and then it all goes sideways by the end of the issue. It all. And what we learn from here is that, and again, this whole first issue is about how he's being manipulated, how the people that are manipulating him, the person in the first page that walks out of the fire, it is about him being manipulated to become this character. And so the trials of the future books are going to be, is he worthy to be a Spawn? And if he is, how do we toughen this guy up a little bit? So there's a lot of that going on. It's a lot of story. For a first issue, I think it's a lot of story, but I think at the same time it's opened up enough that you don't feel like it's like a weight on your head. It kind of moves, and you do get the fighting moment. You do get the moment he goes in and just relentlessly just rips through the room brutally.
Well, like I said, it it is a perfect connect matching with the Spawn book, which I love. I've been buying all the Spawn books. For the first time in a long time, I buy more Spawn books. I now buy DC or Marvel,
Right.
primarily Spawn, and it fits in that universe. It feels like a Spawn book through and through. It
Yeah.
has the violence, the action, the art, the beautiful art. I mean, it has all that there.
Yeah.
And it also has some of the characters that are just fantastic, and interesting characters. Like the one character, the Reverend slash Sheriff
Yeah.
character. There's a mark on this guy's neck. Now, that means something, and I assume it means something. And are you able to share what it means?
No. There's little thing, there's a scene where that scene we see it out his neck. We also see him feeding a dead rat to a horse.
Yeah,
That's not normal.
right. I
Okay.
thought about that, but I was like, that they don't do that, right?
No, they don't do that. So there's a lot about that character that we start to learn. The the thing with this, I wanted to just give you the world around him from the point of view of us, just looking at observing what's going on, and then we realize something's wrong. Something's not right here. And then how the issue ends is, of course, what he thinks is one thing, all of a sudden, wait a minute. And again, in the history of this guy, has he ever seen something like that happen? No. Until he became Spawn, that world is hidden in the universe. So when he becomes Spawn, and we talk about that in the series, is like once somebody told him there's no Santa,
Yeah,
right? All of a sudden all of a sudden he sees the gifts in the closet that the parents are hiding, right? And all of a sudden he sees that the Santa in the store is just a guy with a beard and he's going out to have a cigarette. And all of a sudden the world is starting to be different to him. And that's pretty much what I was trying to get across, that, you know, um, once he became this character, this happened. But the fun part of this book is we do have flashbacks that happen in it, and that's what that 2 pages is from, where it shows why he is who he is and how he became that and why he was chosen. Because he does not have a great life after a certain age, and he gets abducted and he gets suckered into something, and he does get I wrote the whole history, so there's a lot of stuff that happens to him. And again, part of the separation between him and his sister, these are all key things that kind of rip into this guy's soul to make him the person he is in the beginning of the book. So he's not the warmest guy, but he does feel there's a sense of there's a reason he sees two people and being attacked where he says, "No, I don't like that." Like, yeah, I don't like to see that. I'm going to step up. And why he doesn't just walk away from it, you know? So,
Now, I'm sure there's some characters that people are going to be wondering about. I don't know if this connects to the show. I would not give away any spoilers. Characters, some of the favorite characters in the world of Spawn is obviously the Violator group and Cagliostro, if I'm pronouncing it correctly.
yeah,
They obviously do exist at the time of the Gunslinger.
yeah.
These characters we're going to be seeing at some point, or are they going to, or are they still too peripheral until much later?
No, that you down the line, you're going to see Cagliostro. You're going to see these characters will be part of this. They're just not ready to get into it with him so much right now. Um, so part of my book is creating some characters that maybe work for them, or maybe do work for them, or can blend into the world better than they can. And so that stuff isn't abandoned, it's there. We're just not beating you in the head with it. And at the same time, we're trying to get you, my goal is to get you to, at least my goal is to get you to like the character in this time, that you want to follow him and not worry about what Todd's doing so much.
Mm.
Okay. My job is to get you invested in the character in this time frame, that you forget about what's going on in the future books in a way. And it's a hard thing to do because it's sort of like writing Clark Kent in Smallsville. Eventually, he's going to leave and go to, so it is like that, right? So I have to get you invested in this guy. So part of that, as far as what a writer does, is keep some mystery to it, because it keeps you hanging on. And then when you get these little crumbs and you get these little pieces, all of a sudden you go, "Oh, that's who that is." You know, then you feel like you've at least invested in something that's going to play a bigger part.
Now, because we know, as we know, he ends up in the future, we're dealing with a time frame here.
Yeah.
Do we know the time frame in which we're dealing with between your book, Dead Tales of Gunslinger, and when he's going to go into the future? I can't remember how many.
Yes.
Like issue 308 or something along those lines.
Yeah. So my book is about everything before that and who he is and everything before that. And also because the first issue is we get to see the guy turn into Spawn for the first time, right? To turn into a
But,
gunslinger. A lot of my story happens before this in flashbacks.
so, how many years are we talking
We're
between?
talking, we're talking, it's a good question because the way Todd says, your story is ongoing. So don't give the ending is not, it's not about the ending with your character. Your character, it's all about the story. Because I understand it. Because why would I work towards a thing where my last issue is he goes into present day? Now, if they're going to cancel the book 4 years from now, and he tells me your last issue is when he goes into present day, then that's what I'm going to be working on. But
Right.
Todd told me, because as long as you can stay on this book and keep it interesting and create your own world and create some characters that are not in my book, he says your job is to go out there and create uh, part of characters that he interacts with, so people are invested in them as well. And
Hmm.
he's a very smart guy, Todd. He's a very smart guy. And by issue 9, there are like 2 or 3 characters. There's definitely one character in particular that you can almost see like I would read a book about her,
Yeah.
and it's not typical what everybody's going to think it is either. Um, so that's part of the job. It's sort of like, it's like if I'm going to write Superboy for the next 10 years, what did they do in Superboy in Adventure Comics that made people say, all of a sudden Superboy went to outer space and he's with the Legion of Superheroes for a million adventures, right?
Yeah.
So you have to think like that,
Hmm.
in order to do it. And that's a challenge, right? I mean, literally, I think it was Superboy Comics went for 100 and something issues before it went to Adventure Comics featuring Superboy with the Legion of Superheroes. So all that stuff happened before even Superman. Like we see him as an adult in a regular comic. And that's how Todd views it, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, no, definitely does. And the other thing interesting about the issue itself, once again, you have the Reverend slash Sheriff. Do we have an actual name for him, the individual yet that you can share or no?
So I don't, it's the second and third issue kind of lay that out for you. So um, let's just say it's not about his name. You're going to start to figure out what he does and who he, and why he's there eventually. But it's less about the name that'll be revealed, but it's more about this presence that's there in this guy's life. Um, and again, it's about manipulation. We see it from the first 10 pages. We see that he's manipulating everything around him to get him to the point. Now, the middle story with the girl and everything, that was told in an older issue of Spawn. So I took that and dissected it and made the characters, I had to kind of add a beginning and then add an after to that story because we never see it other than those two parts in Todd's books. Um, so I said, okay, it only makes sense if somebody's manipulating this guy to see if he's worthy of being this thing. And that's a lot of what the story is about.
So the goal was not never the girl then. It was always Gunslinger.
Yeah, it was always Gunslinger. Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I don't want
Oh
to give
no,
away
the
what
girl
happens
is
to her.
the girl is so you see in the story the bad guys take the girl, right? And then when we see the sheriff come up, they tell him, "Well, we have the girl." And he makes a comment like, "Did you touch her? Did you mess with her? Like, don't, you know what I mean?" Because it sets up what he does at the end with like he wanted that moment. He didn't want them to have that moment. So he looked at it and he's feeding the horse and he goes, "Did you guys, you know, what's going on here?" So his plan changed a tiny bit, but he still got his moment that he needed. And then when we see the second issue, we'll understand what he's doing a little bit more. So it is a cliffhanger of an ending, but I love an ending where I'm like, what? I like to end a comic on a cliffhanger, um, and then resolve it. And that's what I try to do every issue pretty much.
Like I said, I really liked what he did with it. It like I said, I'm loving the Spawn universe, and I feel like this is a perfect companion to the Spawn universe. I think it's
Thank you.
fantastic. So what can we look forward to next?
Okay, well, number two for sure. In
Yeah.
January, you can look forward to the book being monthly and coming out on time every month, so that's good because we do. But I will say we're going to get to know him more. We're going to see the world now through his new eyes, and his new eyes reveal things that were in plain sight that he never noticed before, and how things are being manipulated around him. We're also going to get a couple of new characters in it. They're going to be a lot more grounded, though. They're not going to be fantastic characters. They're not going to be like like a lot of the Spawn characters. They're going to be real people in real world. Because Todd had one note to me when he hired me. He said, "I want you to ground this book in reality as much as you can, and don't make it all my crazy characters every issue. Don't make." He says, "I need you to. It should feel like you're reading a Western." He says it should, and he goes, "And Gunslinger shouldn't give speeches. He should be pretty much to the point." You know, I do have him once in a while when he's questioning things. He kind of talks a little bit out loud because he's trying to figure out things out loud.
Hmm.
But that's what Todd has the captions. He does the captions in the book, so I have some of the captions in it. Um, but I really wanted to like the first issue was a really like dealing a set of cards to someone where I know all the cards, but now I'm going to play with you a little bit. We'll play that against you. Um, but there's a lot of stuff. There's a couple of issues coming up where he's in a circus, in an old west circus that I love, that are so insane. Like it made me laugh out loud how crazy it is because I took it up a stitch. And then there's one where it was inspired by some bad weather in Utah, and I did this. That's part of the story is that um, it's our characters dealing with a real world problem that you don't see coming in the book, and how they have to get out of that. And there's just a lot of stuff. I mean, I have a Bible of stuff. I'm enjoying going back and telling stories when he was a kid because there's a main bad guy in the story that is somebody from his childhood that less child, more a little older actually, maybe like 18 or 17, um, that he thinks it's one thing, and he learns that the guy's not. And he's like, because of what he was forced to do, he has to go back and go after him, which is like has everything to do with the other characters that he meets along the way. So I do have a lot of stuff laid out for him, and it will be easy to write at least 4 or 5 years of this, easy. Um, because I'm setting up all these different characters and different things. It's up to the artist to kind of stay on it. Patrick's going to do as much as he can, but we do have a couple of fill-in guys that are specifically brought in to do the fill-in because of the content. So,
Nice.
um, if you know me and understand Jonah Hex, it was 70 issues plus of me picking and choosing the artists that match the story. And same is the case with Gunslinger. There's a couple people brought in as one or two down the line that it makes sense to the story why they're doing it. So we've got some fun coming.
Well, like I said, it sounds awesome, Mr. Palmiotti. It was an absolute pleasure talking with you, sir, and I can't wait to read more of your comics.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate you taking the time, and hopefully people pick it up. That's the goal. That's why we create, right?
I think they will, and like I said, Spawn it's been a renaissance for Spawn, and I feel like it's going to keep on going.
Oh, thank you, buddy. I appreciate it, man.
Well,
We'll talk again soon, okay?
have a good night, sir.
You too. Take care.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Vertical Stars podcast. Please like and subscribe. Return for the next episode when comedian Brian Kiley boards the mothership. To next voyage, travel on.